Welcome to Garden Adventures. My name is Malie, and today we're going to talk about frost damage and freeze damage and what it has done to my yard and what that means for my plants. So let's go look at my front yard mostly and see what has happened to my plants. So here we are in my front yard, and as you can kind of see, there's not been a lot of damage, including on my alyssum plants. I mean, they have a bit of frost damage, but you can't really tell because of the flowers. Alyssum is very cold hardy. My weeping cherry tree still looks fine. It will start changing color here, hopefully. It turns a beautiful red color. It took out my hardy hibiscus. The rest of my annuals, like the zinnias, of course, are gone. I'll be pulling those out. Irises don't worry about cold weather at all. They'll stay looking like this most of the rest of the winter. And it just intensified the color of my 9-bark. Butterfly bush seems to be doing fine, as are my mums. The mums seem pretty hardy. Of course, the basil was one of the first things to go, along with the zinnias. And my beautiful Glow Girl Spirea is showing all the colors that it can have. My little Devil 9-bark is still growing strong, to the point of even having flowers on it. And as I knew it would happen, it still made me sad. My pineapple sage and lemon verbena are completely gone. I'm gonna have to tear those out now. Maybe you can see the damage that it's done to my chaste tree. I'm not too worried about it. These shrubs are really sensitive to the cold weather. Sometimes they'll even die back to the ground. They'll come back from the roots. But you can see, I don't know if you can see very well. Okay, maybe you can see a little bit better now. The seeds on the chaste tree are starting to ripen. In California, they'd be completely ripe in December, and that's when I would harvest them. I usually leave these on the shrub until spring, and I harvest them in the spring in Utah. The catmint is still growing strong. I love this plant. I mean, it is a little shaggy around the edges, and truth be told, I could clean it up and make it look better. But it will bloom until we've had several really hard freezes, and it's one of the first ones to bloom in the spring. It'll start blooming in April. So I love this plant, and it gives late fall forage for the bees. Although it's really cold this morning and I don't see any bees out today, but once it gets warmer, they'll be out. I hit my snapdragons a little bit. They are under a shelter. They're under the eaves of my house, so they are sheltered a little bit better. Sadly, it took out my hydrangeas. It even just sapped the color out of them. They were a brilliant pink. Now they're going to start turning a little bit green. I will leave these though until next year, until spring, and see if anything has actually died, cut that out, and cut off the flower heads in the spring. Took out my hostas. They seem to be sensitive to the heavy freezes. Took out my brunera. Now the one thing I'm really glad about is it did not take out the leaves on my jujube. What does early fall freezes do to your plants? Well, if your plants have fruit on them like these jujubes that are not ripe, it'll make it so that they don't ripen anymore. The energy from the leaves is what helps the fruit ripen. So as you can see, I don't know if it's kind of hard to see in this light this morning, but we're about halfway there to ripening. There's quite a few that are fully ripe, but the rest of them, have got about another week left. So I'm hoping, and it looks like the weather is, going to cooperate, but I'm hoping that we don't get any more heavy freezes before these ripen. It's not going to ruin the fruit. They seem to be pretty tolerant of the heavy freeze. It's just I want them to completely ripen before the leaves fall off. But let's show you what it did to my grapes. And what it did to my grapes is just slightly more concerning. It's not really concerning, but let's go talk about that. Now the freeze completely took out my grapevines. Luckily, they're all harvested. The freeze isn't going to really harm the grapes too much, if you let them, as long as you harvest them really soon after the freeze. It may shorten the shelf life a little bit, but what it does is it stops the sugars from developing. So your grapes are not going to get any more ripe on the vine once it freezes. Once it freezes, I would take them, I would completely harvest your grapes. The one thing that an early freeze does do to grapes is it reduces harvest next year. So these leaves froze while they were still green. They did not start changing, their fall colors, although they don't really have a fall color. They just turn kind of brown and then fall off. But they froze while they were still green, which means that all the sugars in the leaves were not pulled completely to the roots. Now this wasn't a real sudden freeze. They didn't go without a frost-free day and then go straight to a freeze. We did have some frost that did help prepare these vines a little bit more for the winter. Once it starts getting cold and the days start to shorten, they will start pulling all their sugars down to the roots to store for the winter, and it will help harden off the grapevines. But we'll see how much new growth we get next year and what the production looks like, and see if this early freeze really affected them. We've had early freezes before, and I haven't really had an issue with it. Let's look at this grapevine under my peach tree and see the difference between, say, this grapevine that's out in the open and the one under the peach tree. So I don't know if you can tell the difference too much. This definitely got hit by the freeze. The leaves are wilting, but they're not completely crispy like the other ones. So this peach tree provided a little bit of cover for it. Not that it really matters on this grapevine. This grapevine gets too much shade to fruit really nicely. Although it did fruit some, I haven't completely finished harvesting them. And they tasted really good this year. If you look at my hill, not too many of the leaves on the trees are starting to change color yet. So these trees will start to pull all their resources down to their roots and be ready for winter. Now we will see what happens to my chokecherry. I'll put a link up at the top here on the video about the girdling root that I had. This tree did not react well to the tree surgery that I did. That girdling root needed to be removed. I don't know if you can see all the sap that's exuding from this tree. That happened within a week after taking, the girdling root off. We'll see if this tree recovers and leaves out again in the spring. And I'm hoping it'll survive. I really like this tree. I'd already cleaned out my garden area, so there's nothing really that was affected seriously by the early freeze. Actually, it wasn't an early freeze. Let me take that back. Now let me clarify something. I keep saying we had an early freeze, but it wasn't really exactly an early freeze. We expect to freeze about this time of year. It's just that the summer had carried on with the warm temperatures for a long time. And so my plants did not actually look like they normally do this time of year, with the leaves changing and looking like they're getting ready for the winter. So I'm counting it as an early freeze. It was just more of a sudden freeze. Is it going to affect my plants? I doubt it. Maybe the grapes will have a little bit less production next year, but this is what plants do. They're acclimatized to our area. They are built to withstand cold temperatures, and every year the temperatures fluctuate. So I'm not concerned about it, and in reality there's really nothing you can do when you're going to have a freeze in the fall. You just expect it. That's what the plants do. They expect it. You'll lose your annuals, and the rest of them will do just fine. So go out, look at your yard, see what the freeze did to your yard, and start dreaming about next spring, because this is the time to start looking forward to next spring. And go have a wonderful garden adventure.